Welcome to another episode of Facts in Mind. Today's guest is truly extraordinary. Dr. Ekaterina Kostioukhina is a medical doctor with postgraduate studies in psychology from Harvard University. After earning her MD from the University of Miami and completing a residency in internal medicine with a focus on obesity medicine, she pursued further education at Harvard Extension School to explore the mind-body connection and the role of psychology in human performance, especially under extreme conditions. It was during a course on brain and behavior in extreme environments taught by Dr. Vladimir Ipkovich that she discovered the field of space medicine, a turning point that reshaped her career.
Since then, she's become a leader in studying how humans adapt to harsh environments, focusing on metabolic states like torpor and hibernation, which could one day enable missions to Mars and revolutionize critical care medicine here on Earth. She served as a guest lecturer at MIT, trained military intelligence personnel, and advises global leaders through parliamentary intelligence and security forum. Her work has been featured in Forbes, Crisis Response Journal, and military publications.
Now based in New Zealand, Dr. Kostioukhina continues her research and humanitarian work while mentoring the next generation of scientists and space medicine pioneers. Dr. Kostioukhina, welcome. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kimia and Amber. I'm also excited to be here and share some of the information that I've learned along the journey.
Thank you again. I can't wait to share your story. I want to also thank Natalie Zender, who introduced me to your work and introduced me to one of the events that you spoke at. So I'm really excited about this episode. I think a lot of people are going to learn new things because it was definitely new to me too. Can you take us back to the beginning? What first sparked your interest in space medicine and eventually human hibernation?
Well, to the very beginning. Since I was very young, I've always been attracted to science. So science has been in my mind, and eventually that led to medicine. Then during medicine, I realized that I got lost into it, and eventually, when I finished with the medical school, survived residency, I realized that it was not enough education because I wanted to learn how the human brain works. I enjoy learning complicated things, and the human body. So once there was nothing else being learned after residency, I realized that there's something missing and I need more. And that is when I found the Harvard Extension School, where I was able to choose curated courses according to my interest. And the courses are really cool. So one of those courses was the Brain and Behavior in the Extremes, taught by Dr. Vladimir Ivkovic, who introduced us to this topic that I didn't know existed. It was space medicine, which is doctors taking care of astronauts. Usually in medicine, we take care of people who are sick, whose body has broken down and needs some fixing here and there. But in space medicine, you have this very healthy, very elite, like genetically perfect, as to say, the right stuff kind of material, humans. And what you need to do is prevent their bodies from being damaged because they are sent to such a harsh environment that their bodies deteriorate. It's very harsh. So that was the main topic of that course. And it actually sparked that interest in me because I also, along the way, as any other kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. Um, but then during that course, realized that I actually found a better calling. And by the way, this was 2020. This is when NASA sent a communication saying, "Hey, we are hiring again." So after a long period of wait of not having astronauts, they started hiring again. So I applied, but during the application, I just realized that I I sincerely feel that being a space medicine doctor and pursuing that is much more fulfilling for me personally than actually being the person going to that space environment, which as a doctor, I understand it's very intense. So I admire a lot the brave people who go into that, who sacrifice, who put their life in danger, and they have to do all that. So I feel much more comfortable and much more fulfilled, actually being able to support them. That way, when they go and represent the human society, our community, our global community, they are much more, they have more tools and they're better taken care of and they can perform better. So that was in the nutshell as far as space medicine. And then in space medicine, there's no road that is made. There's no main pathway. Well, there are some fellowship programs that are established, but there's no well-defined program. So I gradually had to find my way, and it was through research of literature for a publication on human hibernation, which initially we thought, well, it's gonna be cool to do. It's science fiction. We're just gonna, research the literature, see what happens. But then looking in the papers, article after article, I realized that it is quite getting close to becoming a reality. And not just because technology has advanced and the scientists doing an amazing job, but also because there are many applications for life on Earth, such as in trauma care, in remote environments, in crisis management, and also for even chronic diseases. Understanding metabolism, which again also was part of what I studied and what I trained in. But my training was in how to increase metabolism. That way we overcome obesity. But this is totally backwards. This is how we lower metabolism so we can survive in an extreme environment, just like the hibernators on Earth.
Now, the second question is, your path into this field is far from conventional. How did your
Mhm.
life experiences influence the work you're doing now?
Good question. Very good question. So resiliency, I think that is the key word. It is about following what life brings you. So if life gives you lemons, you have to approach it with an attitude of not even just making lemonade, but making all kinds of culinary um, recipes like key lime pie, ceviche, and whatnot. Um, because life is challenging for everyone. If it's not one thing or another, everybody has challenges in the we can plan for the future and we can think that things will come out one way or another the way we want them. But then things happen, like the pandemic happened, and it disrupted so much, but it also brought a lot of benefits. Then so many personal, um, you know, challenges in life. But it's about approaching it with an eye of opportunity. Okay, with what I have now, with what it is, what is the next step that I can do? And little by little, education and researching in this puzzle of human hibernation became a refuge. So it helps me to deal with the life challenges, but at the same time, it leads to something beautiful. So I actually took it as my personal, what I call the next unreachable star, because I feel that humans need to have that motivation, that looking for something that is very big and somewhat unreachable. Like for example, well, medicine was served that purpose before, then Harvard did that, and other goals. But then once those goals are accomplished, you're left with the most challenging thing, which is about finding something else, the next unreachable star. So I believe that pursuing human hibernation and finding the answer for it, like trying to solve this big puzzle, is something that I want to dedicate my life to, little by little. And it's something that I want to leave as a legacy for my children. So when I'm elderly and in my last stages, I will feel fulfilled when my children and grandchildren talk about these things. And human hibernation is widespread as a practice for all kinds of applications. And they say it's like, well, grandma, when in her young age, when she was energetic and strong and important, she contributed to all that. So that is my motivation now for it.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
So, for those that are new to this idea, what exactly is human hibernation or torpor, and how might it be used in space travel?
Yeah, Amber, so that's a very good question because, well, initially I also didn't know exactly what it was, but we see it a lot in most of the space movies. Um, all kinds of movies like well, I guess I notice it more now because like part of it's just part of space travel, but it is in most movies, not just from English speaking countries, but I was traveling here from New Zealand to Asia in a Chinese airline, and guess what, their space movie also has hibernation well developed, so that was exciting to see. I guess we all agree globally that that is a way to go. And why do we all agree on that? It is because it solves so many problems. So right now, the goal of humanity is to reach, well, we have reached the moon, which was important. So we're going to go there again as a stepping stone to farther away to Mars. But the trip is quite long. And right now, the trip is limited not just by the machines, the engineering, but also physiologically, the radiation that is in that harsh environment is too strong, and our bodies will not be able to tolerate it. There will be such thing as radiation poisoning because of the quantity of it, but also an increased risk of cancers that may arise quite soon in the astronauts that we send. So that's quite a limiting factor. But not just that. It takes a lot of energy to send resources, the food, the supplies for people to be active. Also psychologically, we learned a sample of that during COVID when we had to be in a confined environment, which is our houses, which are not as small as those devices, those transportation devices that we're going to be sending the astronauts for such a long period of time, and also being stuck with a small number of people, having difficulty communicating, and so on and so forth. So we experienced some of that effect on mental health. So imagine making it worse for a more intense period and a longer period of time. The psychological effect is quite strong, and many people, or just in general, society minimizes psychological health and psychological, manifestations. But in reality, it's quite important because if the brain is not healthy, well, we have that mental health problem. But the mental health, what it represents is that it results in behavior, and the behavior has already sabotaged a couple of missions in space. And that is directly from, astronauts. They are well-selected people. They are wonderful. They are strong. They are selected from the so many, and they're very few. And even they had already problems from being in that environment. Just imagine longer. There's some studies that even suggest that they will kill each other because, and I know that sounds as an exaggeration, but it's a concern because there starts to be aggression, which it's difficult to control. There are certain feelings that you just can't control, and then impulses and so on and so forth. And our brain depends, just like you need antibiotics or you need something more specific, brain and behavior, it's related. So if the astronauts can be sleeping most of the time and not being exposed to that isolation, that will be helpful. So it is quite it is quite useful for space exploration and also needed. That's why everybody agrees on it. And it is basically just what the hibernators do. Like we're familiar with the bears and the squirrels that hibernate, and we're discovering more and more creatures that go into states of lower metabolism. And they do that during harsh environments, when there's less food, when there's cold, when the conditions are not right, not beneficial for them to continue being active. So they go into this state of quiescence, of sleeping, of being calm, and just wintering the storm or wintering the winter. And, in one way, we are going to be going into those harsh environments. And it's a good strategy to take with us from what is already practiced on Earth, to survive that harsh environment that we're going to be put on. And is it possible, or is it science fiction? Well, the hypothesis is that because there are many species who hibernate, we have common genes with them. And hibernation is nothing more than lowering of your metabolism. It's like a dial up and down. So in obesity, I wanted to increase it as much as possible, with exercise, with certain foods, with supplements, and so on and so forth. But in hibernation and torpor, which are different names for decreasing metabolism, there are different degrees of how much it gets lowered. So it is about lowering as much as possible, to not cross the line of getting into debt, because debt, life is a fight against entropy, and in order to fight against entropy, you need energy. So it is about using as minimum energy as possible in order not to get into disorder of entropy and, disintegrate the organism. So it's about pushing those limits.
So you mentioned that there's some similarities of this human hibernation and animal hibernation, but are there any differences, maybe particularly any physiological or technical type differences?
Well, absolutely. There are more differences than similarities, and what we're trying to see is the more similarities. Um, and well, the hopeful similarities that we have that sometimes we forget is that every night we lower our metabolism when we go to sleep. So when it becomes dark, we enter, or breathing decreases, or heart rate decreases, and even our temperature decreases a bit. And also our brain function starts having, we lose consciousness and we start doing other things. So sleeping does have multiple purposes that are still being worked up. But the point is that we are, as humans, very capable of lowering our metabolism. Then the other interesting component that we call a disease that we complain about is, because of our modern society, is this thing called seasonal affective disorder that many people suffer with. Um, but the more we look into it, the more we start questioning whether this is something that is, kind of a remnant of, or an adaptive behavior of calming down and decreasing energy use during harsh times like the winter, like the other creatures do. And looking into history, right now in society we have built shelters, we have artificial warmth that we can use. We can have artificial light even when the days are shorter, when there's less luminosity of the sun naturally, we can have light. And sometimes that light interferes with our sleep, but that's another story, right? But so we have adjusted our environment so much. But this is recent. Also, we have plenty of food. But looking into history, one thing that called my attention a lot is that back in the 1900s, there was a publication in one of the medical journals that was titled Human Hibernation. And it was about peasants in one of the districts in Russia who will weather the winter and the famines that were very, very common. It's fascinating how privileged we are now during these times that we have food security. But before, it was just famines after famines after famines with failed crops and whatnot. But when the food was scarce and well, with the winters and lack of heating and lack of proper supplies, one community decided to start a tradition and a practice of during the winters they will move as little as possible, sit down in like their living room, their common area around a source of heat, and they will have supplies of dry bread that they will eat and distribute very little gradually during those months. So it was basically moving as little as possible and sleeping as much as possible to, well, utilize less resources. So we have used that. And there's some also other sayings because, we just started getting access to information and recording that information. But if you look at other historians who were recording how humans lived, there's some reports that, yes, there's some tribes, also like in the Russian area where there's quite cold, that will sleep most months of the year. So they will go into hibernation like the bear. So that is like already a label. But also archaeologically, there's some when we analyze the bones, what is left, and the teeth of some of the remnants in some areas, we can see, well, the archaeologists can identify that cyclically there are times when it suggests that the metabolism was decreased in the bones and the teeth. So constantly there, in the history, it seems that we use that strategy. So it's fascinating to see. Maybe we can bring that back with different strategies. There was a lot of hope in what is called targeted temperature management that was widely used for many years. And even during my training, I remember in the hospital we had it, and we will cool down people when they had, for example, a heart attack and there was loss of circulation and it was not going to their brain or their body. There was a protocol for cooling them down to avoid that, what is called reperfusion damage. And it was quite useful, and many people got that treatment. But gradually, the randomized controlled trials in science eventually told us that it's not very useful. And yes, that strategy is also of cooling people down. Is quite intense and requires ICU level of care. So it wouldn't be useful for long duration space travel because you cannot have that kind of monitoring. So the goal is to see more how the hibernators do it naturally, because they just burrow in the dirt and do it naturally with changes in light and decrease in temperature and decrease in food, and it happens. So it's about finding those triggers that will allow us to do it less, less invasively.
It sounds like y'all have come really far on the research side, but what are the key scientific and medical hurdles that researchers like you are still trying to overcome?
Well, ethics, because this is something that you're going to be. We can say that space travel is a commodity and a luxury, and it will be healthy humans who will be exposed to that. Very healthy humans with well trained and with quite valuable humans. So it's challenging to expose somebody healthy to an intervention that can have side effects. So ethics are quite an issue. However, there's application that we can learn from people who are ill, who will benefit from it, because, well, if you don't do nothing, then they will likely succumb to their disease. So there are some scenarios when, for example, in severe trauma, that is quite helpful. That is an option, and it's actually being researched in a trial right now. But it is quite extreme. But again, it can allow for information, and from that information, gradually a protocol can be built. But also, what we can learn from is from for example, other fields. Like I was quite surprised that, well, I keep an eye on the publications, and in one of the publications on hibernation, there was a patent that was placed, and this patent is for putting fish into hibernation. And I was like, oh, interesting. But it's quite an amazing application because just like we refrigerate them now in order to avoid spoiling, putting them in a state of lower metabolism allows them to not get stressed during transportation, to be fresh, right? And it allows for their natural defenses, immune defenses, to defend themselves from being spoiled, from the bacteria taking over. So it's a great application. And from that industry, we can learn what works because they're going to be applying it to fish in masses. So there are many similarities as far as our cells and what we have in common with other creatures that can be translated and learned. So that is it's about finding that out. And the last thing that is quite a hurdle is because it's a field that is not very common. It's very scattered globally, and not just scattered globally in by the different labs that are doing that, but also language barriers. There are different fields that are studying it, but some call it torpor, others call it hypometabolism, others biostasis, others hibernation, suspended animation, and so on and so forth. And if you don't know, if you don't have a big picture of it, you might be missing research that was done and answered a great question that you have that is a missing puzzle in one's research. So it is about bringing all that community together and allowing them to communicate more closely, to work together for a common goal.
Can you paint a picture for us? What would a Mars mission using hibernation actually look like for astronauts?
Well, that's a very good question. So what we're seeing is that it will be so hibernation mostly doesn't happen all the way through. Most creatures, they wake up, and that is what will be happening. That is the likely kind of protocol that will be used for the long duration space travels. And why do they have to wake up? Because they have to do certain functions. And one of those functions, fascinatingly, is sleep. So when the brain, when we are, well, when the creatures are hibernating or in torpor, apparently they don't sleep. So sleep needs to be done differently. So they wake up, they warm up, and then they do those functions. So the astronauts will be rotating. You will need to have somebody who is awake to, be in their senses, to monitor things, to do some troubleshooting. It wouldn't be like in the movie Passengers when everyone is asleep. Somebody has to take turns making sure that they're watching how things are going and troubleshooting in case something goes wrong. So it will be by cycles, a periods of either throughout the day, sleeping more. So right now we sleep 6 to 8 hours during the day, but a group at the University of Pittsburgh, they are trying to push those boundaries and having putting healthy volunteers to sleep for 20 hours out of the day. So it's already research on humans. So that's exciting. So it might be one of those protocols, or it might be sleeping a bit longer for some days, but it is less likely to be something that is like cryopreserved humans sleeping for multiple weeks at a time, because for now we don't have the technology for it. And also for now, the creatures that we are studying, they don't do that. So the way they preserve the energy, the way they survive it, is by lowering their metabolism in bouts. And they economize a lot of the energy by doing that, but they need to wake up to do certain functions because we need to have maintenance, like the sleep that was mentioned. Then urinating will be good. Like for example, if people so bears, they don't make urine when they're in hibernating. It's fascinating. They don't poop. It's so that's not a problem, but we don't know if that is something that's going to be needed. Um, Probably we will not be going into such a deep, low metabolism. So if we are able to wake up and empty your bladder and empty your bowels, then that decreases the problem of having to put a catheter in or even a rectal tube and all kinds of other mitigation strategies that have their own side effects and a percentage of failure. So far, the emerging picture is of bouts of torpor, which out of all the metabolism on all the energy consumption that we are doing normally will decrease that and give us benefits, but it will not be as we see it in the movies for longer periods of time.
It's interesting because you said that because I was just thinking about Avatar. I don't know if you've seen it, but it looks like they're hibernating at the start. Is that correct?
Indeed, absolutely. That is that. Yeah, that's another movie that actually I so in the textbook that is part of the Hibernation project. One of the chapters is about the the science fiction literature. And Avatar is certainly one of the movies because well they use it and we can learn from their ingenuity how they're doing. So it's great that you mention it.
I was just talking about that today, actually. So it's really cool to, talk to someone that's actually working in this field, which is really rare, but I'm very interested in learning more. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested. Yeah, until about a few months ago, when I came to your talk, I didn't even know about this field. So I think a lot of people are going to appreciate it. But here on Earth, too, I know you mentioned a few things. You pointed out some of the things that this could be used for in medical fields. But just for us to learn more, how could these same principles of induced hypometabolism benefit patients here on Earth, like emergency medicine, trauma care, or resource limit areas? How could this benefit them?
Oh, it's that's the most fascinating things because it's so beneficial. It will be actually quite used eventually. So as I mentioned before, we had the targeted temperature management protocol, but that was discredited gradually because well, multiple factors. Part of it is that the options that we have now are better for supporting those survivors, but there is a search for the next non-temperature dependent hypometabolism because what happens is in conditions when the circulation of the body, when the blood stops going to the organs, either because the heart gets compromised from a heart attack and it's not pumping the blood, or if there's a blockage, like in a heart attack, which is a localized blockage to the heart, or a stroke, which is a localized blockage to the brain, or in an anoxic brain injury when somebody hangs themselves, or babies when they're born with a challenging time, or different other reasons why there will be lack of blood circulating to the different organs. So one of the problems that we see is that when those people are saved and the blood flow is restored, there's more damage that's called reperfusion damage. That happens with free radicals, and it causes more damage than the initial assault. And then hibernators, that is not the case. So we're learning a lot from how what strategies they use, and those strategies can be applied directly to those cases. And those cases are quite a lot, and they're quite prevalent in our society, just everywhere: heart attacks, strokes, failure of the heart and circulation, that they are, the doctors and the medical field is looking for something like that to help patients. So that is one applications in those acute emergency issues. But also, for example, if you are in an extreme environment, like for example, here in New Zealand, we use the air ambulance a lot because, well, everybody is far away from the hospital. There's a hospital that is localized in an area that is relatively central, strategically placed, but people are mostly farmers and they are far away. So when they have some kind of problem that all humans have, they need to be brought from far away, and that transportation is can take time. So one strategy is that has been used a lot is to increase the supply. Like, so you give them oxygen, you do different strategies to increase the supply, but then the other strategy is to decrease the demand, which is to lower their metabolism, put them in a state when they're requiring less oxygen, producing less carbon dioxide, and utilizing less. They will need less circulation if that is impaired. So it helps a lot in remote environments that are prevalent everywhere, but not just not just in places like rural environments far away. The traffic in the cities is terrible. I don't know how those ambulances make it. Um, it's the traffic is worse and worse, so it takes time. There's this concept that's called the golden hour, that is a military concept, and it basically explains that in the battlefield, when you have an injury, if you take that person to receive care, um, there is a period of 1 hour between injury to receiving care. That is the critical one. After that, the benefits will decline and there's more to do, will not be as effective. So lowering metabolism stretches that golden hour. That way you have more time to respond and it gives more opportunities to people. Also, there's an active trial that is doing something fascinating. It's quite extreme, actually. It's they're calling it biostasis. Suspended animation, and the goal is to give victims who are of like gunshot wounds, or people who have bled a lot, who are basically quite dead, give them the opportunity while they're being repaired, or attempted to being repaired, because there's a lot going on and the team needs to be assembled and whatnot, to cool them down quite profoundly, like a lot, to put them in that state of suspended animation. There have been some cases that are emerging with good results, but those cases are fragile, so it's going to be challenging. But okay, so this was like acute things, and the other fascinating part is not just for acute components, not just for acute applications, but also for chronic conditions. The chronic conditions are right now at the forefront of our problems on Earth. Heart disease, strokes, cancer. A lot of it is related to metabolic problems, obesity, especially in the States. As an obesity-trained doctor, I remember when I was getting the training, the numbers were 30% prevalence. And now it is 40%. So even though we have more medications now, we have more trained professionals, the problem keeps growing. So we need to find solutions. And the bear is an interesting example. So the bears, they gorge on food a lot. They become obese. Their cholesterol and triglycerides are through the roof. Then they go into low mobility, into sedentary lifestyle for a while, and they emerge just fine. When they look at their blood vessels, they don't have that atherosclerosis, that plaque, which is fascinating. So, and they don't have the chronic illnesses that we associate with that kind of behaviors with becoming obese and having a sedentary lifestyle. So something is different, and by learning what is different and what is happening, we're gaining answers to help our population with this big problem of obesity and metabolic conditions. It's also useful for chronic kidney disease because they're hibernators. They have decreased perfusion to the kidneys and they don't produce urine or very little. And basically their kidneys shrink, but they emerge eventually just fine. So it can be applied to that knowledge. And yeah, just heart attacks. There's some companies that are using some medications already for having better outcomes in heart attacks and strokes that come from this technology. So it has lots of applications, and not just for humans, as I mentioned before, for fish. That you have fresher fish, which will lead to less waste and better nutrition. So that's a great application too, and many more in the chapter. Like I just keep going and I keep finding more and more.
And that's really interesting. I want to ask you also, are there other surprising places where this research could make an impact, perhaps even in humanitarian or crisis response work?
Absolutely. One of the proposed applications will be, for example, if there's a disaster and the resources are limited because, that's the nature of resources, um, until people are provided with their care or waiting for transportation or are waiting for their care, there can be shelters of hibernation where they can go and be safely placed in a state of lower metabolism, either because they are sick or because there are no resources like food that is able to get to them. Um, Temperature or other resources that are quite limited. So that is a fascinating application that surprised me a lot, like shelters for disasters. Or another one that was interesting is for mental health. You know, for me, it is difficult to understand because I am very active and I have lots of projects, so I have never enough time to do them all. But when I speak to normal people about this, they tell me it's like, oh yeah, I really wish I could hibernate, and that's a repeated comment. So it just made me realize that not everybody would like to people would like to take a break from their daily routine, from their life. And it might be an option in the future where they can do that. And actually, there's a book, it's a science fiction book. It's called Hibernaculum, which is exactly about that. A possibility of people hibernating, and they go to a specific company, and yes, they gorge on high calorie food. It's more like the bear style. But they go to a company and everything is put into a hold and they go hibernate for some months. But then also what was surprising is that, some people, the social discrepancies, some people may want to do that because, they may want to save resources because not everybody has access to resources. And some populations, they have famines and still during these times, or they have disasters. So for some people, it might even be, not an option, but the solution. And at the same time, that might become their routine, which makes us ask the question, so what about the people who have a constant stream of resources? They will not have to hibernate and they will be able to continue with their projects and their life and continue building things. So it might make the gap a bit stronger, but we'll see what emerges. We're still far away from that kind of application, but it's interesting how socioeconomic determinants of health still appear even in these topics.
And while I have you here, because it's a rare chance to have someone like you here, is it true, because I've heard it, but I don't know if there's any research on this, is it true that lower metabolism can also lower chances of cancer? Is that true?
Well, yes, it's quite interesting. Even one of the applications that is for cancer. So there are different applications for cancer. One of them is to put people in a state of low metabolism until if the cure is near, and they can wait a few months or a short period of time, as far as years, for the cure to be developed because cancer therapy is moving quite fast. So that is an option because when you lower the metabolism, things are moving slowly, including the reproduction of the cells, which is the cancer cells. So that is one application. The other application is when you're giving radiation therapy for cancer. Well, radiation therapy, one, it is quite harsh in the other cells, and two, it is quite limited by the dosage that you give. So if you apply lower metabolism principles as strategies for radiation therapy for cancer, then you can mitigate the damage to the other cells, which are quite distressing to people. The side effects are sometimes even worse than the disease itself. But also, there's possibility of providing, of expanding this radiation therapy much more, that will be able to actually target a cancer even that is widespread, by giving a higher dose, but people will be able to tolerate that higher dose. So that is one part. And then the other that comes to mind is a case that was in a book by Oliver Sacks. And one of those cases is that there was an older man who was just like, but this was years ago. So those cases are real, but this was years ago before we knew much more than we know now. So he came to visit a family, and their grandpa was just like not moving much. He was just sitting and sleeping all day, and they will put him in bed, and then during the day we'll put him in the chair and he'll just sleep. And he was wondering, he's like, "Well, what's up with this body, with this condition?" So eventually this doctor figured out that it was low thyroid hormone. So a case of um, well, a reason for low metabolism. So this thyroid hormone was replaced, and yes, the man woke up and started being more active. But then also what happened is that apparently he had a lung cancer brewing that was dormant because his entire body was dormant. And once his metabolism was brought up again, so did the cancer. So that was an interesting story.
Yeah, thank you for sharing because that's exactly what I was thinking. I know
Mhm,
hypothyroidism, which is, your thyroid being underactive.
mhm,
For a lot of cases, they try to like make your thyroid kind of go faster so your metabolism can be fixed. But with
mhm,
that, I think your chances are also increased, especially when they try to introduce more hormones and other things to your body, of having other types of aggressive cancers.
mhm.
So is that something that like what is the best case scenario then if you know that information, like do you still recommend somebody to try to go against the hypothyroidism or just leave it be?
The take-home point is live each day that we have given to the fullest without regrets, and take it as a gift because we cannot achieve immortality. Nobody has been able to do it regardless, not with all the money in the world, not with all the power and resources. So at least for now and for many generations to come, that is the state. And then also coming from obesity, before my mindset was to increase the metabolism. That way you can achieve a better health, right? But then this health is from the perspective of, well, less diabetes, right? Because obesity is associated with all those other things that afflict our health. But the problem is that when you have higher metabolism, you're opening a different can of worms. And it seems that we have kind of like a specific clock. You know how they say it's like the heartbeats are counted. Um, so the higher the metabolism, the faster you live. The lower the metabolism, what we're seeing is that the hibernators live longer. But well, they live longer because they're sleeping all the time. So I don't know what kind of quality of life is that, right? If you're sleeping most of the life, then I don't know if like doesn't count, right? You haven't What's the point of living if you're sleeping and you're not enjoying and doing the things that make us feel alive? So it is about that balance. So when our metabolism is higher, then yes, things are going faster, like in a machine. And when things are going faster, they wear off faster because again, we're limited. The telomeres at the end of the genes, they have so many reproductive cycles. And so far, the process of senescence, which is the aging process, is something that gets triggered in us at a specific time. Um, so just like adolescence gets triggered and other processes they happen. So same thing, this process of decomposing and gradually shutting down. So there's a high possibility of reaching that faster. And even when you're exercising more, even though it's good, but then you're wearing off, you're causing more wear and tear, and eventually people, they feel great in their 30s and 40s, but then they need knee replacements and they have more injuries. So it's that balance. We don't know the answers to everything, but the from understanding the both extremes, it's about living in the present.
Thank you. Perfectly said. Balance and also I think quality over quantity. So yeah,
Indeed.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So there's something almost poetic about the idea of slowing down the body to preserve life. What does
Mm.
this work mean to you on a deeper human level?
Yeah, that's indeed to slow down states of meditation of what we're being told in modern life, just slow down and enjoy. Um, so yeah, it is towards that component, but I feel it is more towards survival, towards giving people the possibility of venturing into those harsh environments, such as space, or even being able to live in remote environments on Earth and still have better opportunities. So for now, it is, in my mind, it's associated with survival and the possibility of extending life during harsh conditions and crisis. But yes, one of the pathways for lowering the metabolism is through practices such as meditation, which are, again, research shows that it's quite good for our brain. It helps with anxiety and a lot of the mental health, the modern problems that afflict us because we're going too fast. Perhaps we do need to rest a bit more, but we expose ourselves to blue lights at night that's interfering with our sleep. We are demanding of ourselves to work night, day, and longer hours, even though the sun is out and we're supposed to be resting during all kinds of seasons, even though the conditions are harsh. We're asking from ourselves to just keep going. And if we're tired, we just, we use fatigue suppressants such as caffeine, which is, after this research, I will never look at caffeine the same way again because, caffeine, what it does is that it blocks adenosine receptors in us. That way, even though adenosine is floating and it's telling us you're tired because I've used a lot of energy, it blocks it. So our body just doesn't hear that, doesn't perceive that. That's why we have a crash when it wears off, then all the adenosine just rushes in and we're like, oh gosh, it's like I'm really tired, right? Um, and in hibernation research and torpor research, it's backwards. We use adenosine stimulants, adenosine receptor stimulants to cause that sensation of you're tired, slow down, go to sleep. So it's we are just perhaps we do need to rest a bit more and slow down in our modern society in order to be healthier. Perhaps that is the answer to a lot of the conditions that are ailing us, in which are mostly metabolic nowadays. The antibiotics took care of the infections, which were killing people, but now we have a lot of metabolic problems, which are still causing a lot of devastation globally.
Yeah, yeah, that's a lot for me to digest and think on. Oh, wow. So, with all this, what are some of the ethical questions or concerns that come up when we talk about putting humans into a torpor state?
Well, right now there's lots of ethical questions and I wouldn't say obstacles, because the ethical guidelines, they are there to protect humans, because before they were there, horrors were happening. Just terrible research that was causing a lot of pain into populations that were unprivileged, and just terrible, terrible things. So those guidelines are there to help us not inflict the damage, because the main goal that we want to achieve is to help society, right? So if we do it in a way that causes significant distress to a certain population, then that goes against the principle. So it's about being creative and figuring out ways that we can minimize the harm while doing the research, but actually testing it out on humans. So one of the solutions that is just fascinating, that we're living in this day and age, is artificial intelligence. Just last year, some of the news that were exciting to read, and this is one of those things that one, as a geek researcher in this very specific topic, opens their email, because that's the electronic way of getting the news, and like looks at the Harvard Gazette, and it's like, surprise, the Harvard researchers are getting closer to human hibernation and the states of torpor. And the way they did it was fascinating, because they took the tools that are available with artificial intelligence, and they compared a compound that is promising in animal studies, but by the way causes seizures, so it will never be approved for humans. Um, and they asked the artificial intelligence program to find from all the FDA approved medications that are already deemed um, okay, relatively safe. So everything has their side effects, but are tolerable by humans. They said which compounds resemble this one. And they found quite a few of compounds that lower the metabolism, that are being studied right now in, first in animals and then gradually more and more. But it's fascinating how we can use technology to speed up research, because the whole point is to answer the question of how physiology works, how the human body works, how life works, how this biology, how do we tick, how do we dial the clock up and down of the metabolism. So if we can achieve that without exposing humans or animals to suffering, and doing that with other tools such as artificial intelligence to help us see the answers, that is quite beneficial. And then the other component that is being looked at with the University of Pittsburgh is using the sedatives, again, that are already used in humans, and that have gone through all the credentialing, through all the testing, but repurposing them for placing people in a state of sleeping longer, well monitored to avoid problems, but already using compounds that have been proved safe and with least side effects. So that is fascinating. It brings me back that the the idea of putting people to sleep was happened already some years ago in the field of psychology and psychiatry, because a lot of these conditions in mental health, like severe depression and others, anxiety, were able to be solved with sleeping for a while, and people were put to sleep. However, the technology was not advanced and the vital signs could not be monitored, and sometimes the medications were too strong and people died because they were too anesthetized, so they could not maintain their breathing because it was too strong. So became too controversial, and it is avoided now. But now that we have more tools, it can be for monitoring and more wearables, more advances in technology, we can bring back some of those ideas and applications.
You work across disciplines, medicine, AI, policy, crisis response. How do you stay grounded while balancing all these missions?
Well, right now I don't. Yes, right now it is really difficult because, well, I guess I'm a workaholic, and I need to remind myself not to take on so many projects. It's about that I think that inner call for being alive and doing things and just pursuing interesting activities and contributing that lead to that. But also, one doesn't have to do everything at once. So, for example, there's some periods when I'm mostly dedicated to the research, and other periods that I'm mostly dedicated to advocacy, and other things that overlap actually, aligning the goals. You can do advocacy for research. So the answer is, it's important to avoid burnout, um, which I need to apply, practice more what I preach, right? To avoid burnout, one needs to frequently ask oneself, what are my goals? Because you can be pulled into so many directions, and you can feel that you're not accomplishing everything that you were wanting to. But then it's important to ask, what is it exactly that you want to accomplish in the bigger picture of life? What is important right now? Is it so family is extremely important. So it's important to align whatever else is happening to that, and to make sure it is not being neglected, because that is the base of everything. But also, for example, once you identify something that you're passionate about, then it is much easier to keep your eye focused on that mission, and you get less distracted by other things. But then at the same time, those different things, they align. You just you seize the day, as we say in Harvard. That saying, what is it in Latin? Um,
Of carpe diem.
yeah, exactly. Yes, because opportunities come to us, and they may not be what were planned for that day, but if it came to you, you might as well just embrace it, especially the challenging ones, to avoid suffering, but to make something good out of it.
I think that's some really great advice for all of us.
Mhm.
So, for listeners who are fascinated by your work, whether it's in space medicine, biomedical innovations, or a kind of multidisciplinary research you're leading right now, what are some realistic first steps they can take to get involved or contribute?
Well, good question, Kimia. So it's important first to identify that that is what they want, because it's a grueling journey. Because from one perspective, the funding is not well defined. So it's not like you go to a specific work and you're paid per hour and you're satisfying the other needs. So it is something that you need to invest a lot of your own time and research, and then benefits start to arise. But it is important to define that you actually love that, um, and then get surrounded by that environment. In this day and age, we have the tools of social media, which can be bad and induce anxiety and all kinds of problems and addiction and grab our attention. But also these tools can be used to create our um, surround ourselves, like to create that bubble, that healthy bubble of people who are in that same field, who are either, and it works for all kinds of professions, whether you choose space medicine or something as a niche as hibernation medicine. I'm constantly looking for those. Like I read the articles and then go on LinkedIn and connect with the authors of those articles. So that way we communicate with ideas, but also there's the emotional neurocognitive contagion, because the ideas of the people who you are connected with, they influence you. You know how they say that you're well, there's a saying in Spanish. I don't know how to say it in English right now. But tell me with who your friends are, and I will tell you who you are. Because even though we like to pretend that we have our own free will, that we are able, we're strong to be able to have our own personality and not be influenced by other people. But neurologically, and according to research again and again, um, it shows us otherwise. We're quite influenced by the people who surround us. So it's important to choose carefully. And right now we have the possibility. We can, even though we might be far away from people, or we might be looking into something very specific that is quite limited in the geographic area, but through the digital tools, we can choose that crowd to influence us in a good way. That is the most important piece of advice, to be surrounded by the right people. And then just gradually, I set up an alarm, a reminder on my phone, again, using technology, um, to build um, that routine, because we become what we do every day, that routines. And it's one of the alarms is, okay, space medicine. What am I doing today to do a little bit of space medicine? And it's becoming like a subconscious thing already. And you just gradually every day do something, either connect with people or read an article or write something or go to a conference or something that every day fulfills that little one step at a time. And eventually it becomes bigger and bigger and it becomes who you are.
Absolutely. That sounds great. And, on that note, and also lastly, what advice would you give to young scientists, students, or future explorers who feel called to venture into the unknown, but aren't sure where to begin?
Well, the most important advice is to give yourself permission to dream big. Um, According to what I've lived throughout my life, by personal experience, but also what I have seen from other people, the most challenging thing is to not be an obstacle to yourself. We are our biggest obstacle. We are the ones who limit ourselves, because the most impressive things that you will think are impossible can become possible. So let's not judge what is possible, and say it's like, oh, well, if somebody wants to be an astronaut, it's like, oh, well, right now the state is that from this country there are no astronauts, whatever, whatever obstacles there are, like whatever we think the reality is, because things change. That's one, and then miracles happen. I'm a woman of science, but what I have seen is just fascinating. And as a woman of science, the more data we collect, we cannot ignore it. So um, give yourself permission to dream big and enjoy it and pursue it. And don't think about what what are the obstacles that will make it impossible or difficult. Just you know set it up as your impossible unreachable star and gradually go towards it. The decision, keep that in your radar, in your focus, not obsessively, because it's something that takes time. So it may, if you want it for yesterday, it will cause anxiety and distress. But you will be also observe yourself, because you will be surprised by how much you have achieved, um, because it is possible. So it is also about guiding your decisions. Like, for example, if you want to be an astronaut, right? That's an example. Um, what other astronauts have suggested, and they given an example. So once they made a decision, even as a child, it influenced their further decisions. So for example, an astronaut who is growing, what kind of food will they eat? Will they eat junk food, or will they eat healthy food? So that's already influencing your decision. Or will they read a book, or will they watch TV? That kind of thing. So it once you set up that goal, it gradually influences what you're doing. And there's a saying that was part of college: shoot for the moon, and even if you fail, you will land among the stars. That's quite as an analogy, that's quite true. But in for when I teach at MIT, I the students, I don't think they don't take it quite well, because, well, if you're shooting for the moon, you want to end up on the moon. That is that is the kind of thing that they do. But as an analogy, set a goal that is high, because the decisions that you make for it will lead you to something that, even if it's not that, it will lead you to something beautiful and impressive also. So the sky is not, you'd say, it's like the sky is the limit. That was the expression. But now NASA has told us that the sky is not the limit. There's much more. And as that astronaut said, I know the sky is not the limit, because there are footprints on the moon, and I made some of them. So
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for being here. It was such an honor to have you here with us. And a big thank you to our audience, our listeners, for joining us.
thank you, Kimia. Thank you, Amber.